All right, good morning, campers, or good evening whenever you're watching this video. This is the next video about drawing. It's sort of our preparation to getting into pictures, and this is going to describe a package called gridLib, in particular something called SimpleGrid that Professor Spacco put together. And so let's get moving on that. Oops, there we are. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about packages. We've mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. Packages are groups of classes that are typically related to each other. Other languages, other systems call these libraries. In Java, they're called packages typically. If you take a look at the Java API, you will see a ton of packages. Java.lang, Java.util, Java.io. Those are all packages. Java.awt. Those are all packages, and we'll get to use a lot more of them as we go along. Okay, so gridLib is a package that helps us do very simple drawing. It contains 4 different classes: cell, shape, drawing grid, and SimpleGrid. And we don't really care about anything except SimpleGrid. The other 3 are really helpers that they do most of the work that SimpleGrid needs to have done in order for your drawings to appear on the screen. But other than that, we're really not going to talk about any of them. Okay, so what SimpleGrid does is it makes a rectangular array of giant pixels for you to color and make pictures. It's, as the name implies, very simple. It only has a very few methods, starting with constructors. In order to actually make a SimpleGrid, you have to execute a constructor, which we've seen before. There are 2 constructors for SimpleGrid. The first one takes the number of rows and columns in the grid, and it creates the grid for you so you could create a rectangular grid. Remember that the new operator is a reserved word in Java, and it executes the constructor, which creates the instance of the class. And it passes back a reference to where that instance is in memory, and that's what gets stored in grid there in this line. The second way that you can make a simple grid is just by giving it the number of rows, and it will then duplicate that and will create a square grid for you. Again, executing the constructor, creating the instance, and passing back the reference into the variable grid. Okay. You can change the size of the grid squares. They start out being a size, an arbitrary size of 1, call it, and you can change the size of each grid square using the setSquareSize method, and you just give it the new size, and magic happens. Or you can also see what the current size is using getSquareSize. This is an example, a classic example of what are known as mutator and accessor methods. Any method, the convention in Java is that any method that starts with the word set is a mutator or setter method, and any method that starts with the word get is an accessor or getter method. It just gives you information. Setter just changes the value of some variable inside the object, inside the instance. Okay, you can also change colors and get colors. You do that using the setColor method. So you change the color of each grid square one at a time. You give it the setColor method, the row and the column, and then the new color that you want that grid square to have. To find out what the current color of a grid square is, you use getColor and give it the row and the column, and you notice what it returns back to you is it returns back the color object so that you can then query that. you can find out how many rows and how many columns are in your grid using the getNumRows and getNumColumns methods. Notice that you can't set the number of rows or columns. Once you've created a SimpleGrid, that size is fixed and you can't change it. So you can't alter the number of rows or alter the number of columns. So those methods, those setNumRows and setNumColumns methods, they simply don't exist. And that means that you can't make any of those changes. Okay. You can also, now the default grid includes grid lines, just as if you're doing an Excel spreadsheet. But there are times, like in the next problem set, when you don't want them there. So we'd like to get rid of them. And you can do that by, there's a single method called setGridLines, and it takes as input a Boolean. And if setGridLines is true, then the grid lines will appear. And if you give it an argument of false, then the grid lines will disappear. And that's it. There's not much else in SimpleGrid. There's nothing that we need in SimpleGrid. That's all of the methods that you have access to. So it's very easy to use. You can create grids, you can change the size of the squares, you can set the colors, and you can make the grid lines appear and disappear, and that's pretty much it. So let's take a look at an example here. So here is the actual package, the gridLib package. And these are the four classes that we talked about. There's cell, there's shape, there's drawing grid, and there's SimpleGrid. We don't care about anything except SimpleGrid. In fact, we're not going to use the package itself. What we'll use is something like this. So what I've done here is I created a project in BlueJ called SimpleGrid Project, and I added the package to it so that we could see it and use it. And then we created a class called TestSimpleGrid. Actually, Professor Spacco created this class, and I added all the comments and stuff to it. And so this is just to do simple tests on the SimpleGrid package. You will get to do more of it when we do the next problem set. Our class name is TestSimpleGrid. Notice that we have to import color because we're going to change the color. And remember, this is the name of the package, the Abstract Windowing Toolkit package, and then color is the class inside that package that we want. In the same way, gridLib is the name of the package that we're using, and drawing grid and SimpleGrid are the names of the classes that we're going to be using. Okay, and then we have our main method here that's going to get the work done for us. In this example, all I'm doing is creating a simple 20 by 20 grid. I instantiate the new grid, and the reference to it gets put in the grid variable here. On the console, we print out the number of rows and the number of columns just to illustrate how getNumRows and getNumCols work. And the main part of the program here is this for loop, where we start at 0 and we go up through the number of columns. It doesn't matter, I could use columns or rows because this is a square grid. And every time through the loop, I'm going to increment by 1. And what I do is I change the color of the II grid square each time through the loop. And so that means I'll change 0, 0, and then 1, 1, and then 2, 2, and then 3, 3, and then 4, 4, etc. So what I'm going to do is change the colors of the grid squares on the main diagonal of the table. And I'm going to change them from white to blue. So let's see how this works. And we'll close this, come here, and execute main, and poof, and there it is. And here I've actually run this a couple of times before. So here's the width and the height that get printed off correctly. And here's the drawing grid, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 across, and you can take my word for it that it's 20 down. And then all of the squares on the main diagonal are now blue. And so there's other changes we could make here. Get rid of that. We could, for example, change the color to red. And recompile because we've changed it. We didn't make any mistakes. Do it again. Go. Boink. And they're all red now. I'm going to get rid of all these extra ones. There we go. And so that worked just quite nicely. We can do other things. We could, instead of doing I, we could do 0. I, compile, close, main, and go. Doink, and that will turn all of the grid squares on the 0th row, which is the first row, to red. I could go back and do, instead of doing the first row, I could do the first column. Compile and go there. Thunk. And there you go. So now a question would be, how would I do the first row and the first column? How would you do the first row and the first column? So here, this is going to do the first column, right? What about if I do this? I'll give you a second. I need to add a line. What would the line say? Yeah, well, see, that would be a good review question, or a good clicker question. So I think I'm going to say grid.setColor 0, I. Oops, I, comma, color blue, and see what that does. We'll compile. Did I type anything wrong? No. And go. Boink. Ta-da. Oh, you notice what happened here. I overwrote the 0th one because I did blue second instead of first. So that one ends up there. But then we did all of the columns here and all of the columns there to get both the first column and the first row. So that's cool. So that should give you some ideas about the kinds of things that you can do. And that's pretty much it. That's all I want to say about SimpleGrid. We'll come back to this for the next problem set. And I'll see you soon. Bye.